So here we go. This is the second reading of the day. It is from the Gospel of Luke, and I've been using the New Living Translation. In the 10th chapter, one day, an expert in religious law, a theologian, stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question: "Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life?" Or, "Teacher, what should I do to get into heaven?" Jesus replied, "What does the law of Moses say? What's it say in the books? What do you read there?" The theologian answered, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "Right," Jesus told him. "Do this and you will inherit the afterlife. Do this and you will go to heaven." The man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, "So, who's my neighbor?" Jesus told him this story in reply. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bad men. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead by the road. By chance, a minister came along, a priest. But when he saw the man lying there, he crossed over to the other side of the road and passed by him. A temple assistant, an assistant pastor, we could say, walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Then a despised Samaritan. Fill in any of your enemies here. They could be international enemies. Maybe it's Iran. Maybe it's North Korea. Maybe it's the Russians or the Chinese or any personal enemy you might have. Then a despised person came along, enemy of the people. And when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with wine, as an antiseptic, I suppose, and olive oil as a soother, and then bandaged him. Then he put the man on his own donkey, put him in his own car, took him to a hotel, and took care of him there. The next day, he handed the hotel owner his credit card and said, "Take care of this guy, and if the bill runs too high, I'll take care of it. I'll see you next time." Now, Jesus says, who of these three men do you think was neighbor to the man who was attacked by the bad guys? And of course, the theologian replied, the one who showed him mercy. And then Jesus said, "You're right. Go and show mercy." That's how you treat your neighbor. That's how you find your neighbor. You may be seated, please. So, what do you have to do to get to heaven? Believe in Jesus. He died on the cross. It says here, you need to love. It says in the Gospel of Luke, you need to love. How do I get to heaven? The theologian asks Jesus, and he says, you need to love. That's the summation of the law. You need to love. It's super simple. Jesus is not a complicated character. His message was to his disciples before he went to the cross, love each other as I have loved you. That's it. That is the summation of it all. And there's tangible love and there's intangible love. There's the love that you share between people that you feel, and there's the love that's sort of tangible that you do. There's an old woman who I knew in Boothbay Harbor, a very wise old woman, very poor old woman, who said to me of her neighbors, those kids weren't raised, they were dragged up. You can love your kids. The neighbors of hers, they love their kids, but they didn't care for their kids. Loving and caring are parts of the same divine experience of what it is to be a person of faith. You love and you do. Jesus said to that fellow, that theologian, who's the one who lived out the law? Well, the one who showed mercy. Mercy is love. Charity is love. Joy is love. Compassion is love. Wisdom in heaven is love. Understanding in heaven is love. It always comes down to love, because God is love. If you know love, then you know God, it says in the epistles. If you know love, then you know God. And if I were the divine creator and I was going to make humanity, and think about this for a minute, that includes Neanderthals and Denisovans and Anthropithecus. I can't even say the word. We're talking 100,000 years of Homo sapiens and 1,000,000 years or more of hominids. And if I was going to make birds and chickadees and fish, I'd put inside them, and if I wanted to make them find me, I put inside them, each of them, a little bit of me. A little bit of me. If I send them into this darkness, away from the light, so that they can find me. Okay, here's the surprise. It has something to do with what Alan said. Who here has ever had a visitation from a deceased loved person? Raise your hands up so I can see them. A dead person who you loved came to visit you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Who here has ever experienced a feeling, a whisper, or a sight of what you could call a being of divine light, or AKA an angel? Who here has ever experienced a sign? So for instance, someone you love, I have this friend, his son ended his own life 15 years ago, and now my friend finds dimes everywhere, just a dime. And when he sees the dime, he has the feeling that his son is present. Whether his son is present or not, I don't know, but his experience is love. Anybody like that? So now everybody who raised their hand once, everybody raise their hand. Who raised their hand once. So look around here. You have almost the entire congregation who've had a direct divine experience. This afternoon, I'm going to have a service for a man who died of suicide. He's the 4th person in the family, the 3rd person in 2 years. When the widow, with whom I met the other night, told me that he had come to visit her, I asked her, this grieving woman who was making plans. This guy, he wasn't depressed or despondent. He was making plans. He was successful. One day he's here, and the next he's gone, no warning. They were making plans together. I said to her, because she's in deep grief, I said, after he visited you, while he visited you, did you have an understanding of love, of well-being, of forgiveness, of apology, any of those things? She said, yes. I said, did your grief shift? She was silent and she thought about it. She said, yes. I'm still in grief. I'm still in mourning. I still miss him, but I now know, and that's the word, I now know that the afterlife is real. She no longer believes in the afterlife. It is not a matter of a belief for her. For her husband, she knows he is alive. She knows that. I postulate that every single person in this room who's had a divine direct experience knows a little bit of wisdom about God. A little portion of it. Now I know in part, then I will know in full. It seems to me that churches should be the place where we feel free to talk about our mystical experiences. And brothers and sisters, this is mysticism. You know, when the Protestant Revolution occurred, they tossed mysticism out the door, and we became hyper-rational. And those of you who know me know that I'm an analytical, rational person, especially if you read my Facebook page where I'm always posting up stuff about quantum physics and geology and anthropology. I'm very interested in empirical evidence and analytical thought. But those of you who know me also know that I've died twice. Went to heaven and came back. That disrupted my reason because I shifted from belief to knowing. I know God is real. Each one of you in the congregation here today, you all know a little tiny bit of God. You know it. No one can convince you otherwise, especially when it's a deceased loved one who came and visited you and communicated to you, probably telepathically, an impression of love, an impression of apology, an impression of forgiveness, an impression of well-being, an impression of peace. Not words about it, but a feeling, an experience about it. God is experiential. The love that you guys share, grandmother, granddaughter, that's experiential. You know it. You know a portion of God. You've already made the shift away from pure belief, which is a rational choice and something you don't know, to an interior knowledge and relationship to the divine that's unshakable in that portion. Now we know in part, then we will know in full. When I was dead the first time, anything I wanted to know, I knew in an instant. And not just like, how is paint made? I would know all the chemical compositions of all the paint in all the universe and how to put it together. That's a stupid example, but it gets the message across. Anything I wanted to know, I knew. I knew it in full. In full. When we die, and we will die, no one gets out of here without doing that. You get to go home. And if you had a taste of heaven here, experientially, a little tiny bit, that's enough to give you hope forever. Hope is what my friend whose service I'm doing this afternoon lost. Hope is what his wife has. I'm believing that one of the reasons why Christian churches are in such steep decline is because we're super educated. We know that the universe is 13.7 billion years old. We understand that I probably carry some Neanderthal DNA. Just yesterday in the news, they photographed the first quantum entangled photons pair. We know that there's another dimension we don't understand. A month ago now, the United States Navy came out with a new policy on UFOs. That's because a year ago, they came out with video footage shot off of an aircraft carrier out of San Diego from a couple of Hornets that chased UFOs. And because apparently on the eastern seaboard, there's been a whole bunch of these things harassing or following or observing the fleet. The Navy, being as smart as they are, and that's not I'm not kissing here. I'm just saying. The Navy, as smart as they are, recognize that they don't know what this is, and they got to figure it out. So now they're allowing their pilots to report this. We are not alone in the universe. We have this mistaken understanding in Genesis, from Genesis, that we are the pinnacle of creation, and we're not. We are just nature with the capacity for self-reflection. We are consciousness. When we find out that we're not alone, when we find life on Euclid, one of the moons off of Saturn, we will find life elsewhere. We won't be special anymore. That's going to be myth busting. That's going to be mythology busting. That's going to be Christian busting. We need now in the 21st century to start thinking with a new way of understanding ourselves. This is not to cast out Christianity or God. This is to invite God into our new understanding of ourselves. Because the thing that you experienced, the loved one who came to visit you, the dream that you had, your meeting with Jesus. Oh, anybody meet Jesus here, other? See? Yeah. An angel? Those aren't new things. Those go back centuries and centuries and centuries. We just don't talk about it because churches were afraid to talk about it. So we've got the pressures of our new understanding of science, which we need to integrate into the church and into our mythology and into our theology. And we have this direct experience of the divine that we never talk about. And if we can't talk about our real experiences of the divine in church, where are we going to talk about it? So you know what happens? I asked this in a congregation a week ago. I said, so who here has ever had this experience? And yada, yada, yada. Half the church raised their hands. Who here has ever talked to anybody about it in church? Nobody. Nobody has courage to talk about it in church. And so what happens? They sit in silence in their congregation, and they wonder why their congregation is failing, because they don't talk about their spirituality. We have to talk about our spirituality. And when I say that, I mean our divine direct experience of God. That's what people crave. I go to these conferences around the country, and there's all these former Christians there. It's a lot of New Age people, near-death experience conferences. I speak, and I meet all these people. And, they say to me, I had this experience of an angel, and I went to talk to my pastor about it. He said, you're crazy. So they leave. They leave the church because they don't fit in anymore. We all know only ever in part. This whole thing is the body is a veil. We can't see through it. We only get glimpses. When I had no body, I saw lots more. Now that I have one, I forgot most of it. I can't see what I saw. But I brought back enough to know that my body is the vessel I live in. My consciousness is not from here. Last thing I'm going to say. There's this guy named Sam Parnia. He's a surgeon in Stony Brook and also at the University of Southampton in England. He came out with a study this year. It's been 10 years he's been doing this. Because on his surgical table, people were dying and coming back and saying, I saw this, I saw that, I went here, I went there. He's like, but you're dead. I could see you're dead. All the measurements, you're dead, but you're having a conscious experience. What is this? He collected all this data, came out with a book this year, book last year, paper this year. And in the paper he says, we now can say that consciousness survives death. It appears that consciousness survives death. This isn't mysticism, really, I use the word. This isn't mystery. This is physics. This is physics we don't understand. I know that I'm not my body. Anybody here ever travel outside their body? That's the craziest thing of all. You can raise your hand small if you don't want to confess it. I know I'm not my body. I learned it the day that I died. I came back into my body again. I'm much smaller now than I was when I was dead. When I was dead, the first thing that happened to me when I was dead, I thought to myself, this is who I am. That is not who I am. This is who I am. I'd forgotten who I was. That's all we've done is forgotten who we are. Science is going to show in the 21st century that consciousness does not arise in the brain. It's already beginning to show that. Consciousness comes into the brain like software. And through the filter of our five senses and the world that we live in, we're blinded. It's the filter, it's the veil itself. Jesus said, who gets into heaven? The one who loves. That's who gets into heaven. The one who loves their neighbors, themselves, loves their grandmother, loves their granddaughter, loves themselves, and that can be the hardest thing of all. Loves God above all things. But here's the trick of it. God is love, and every time you share love with anyone, or yourself, or your neighbor, or with God, you love all three, neighbor, self, and God. You only need to love one of those things to love God. Because love is one thing, and that's God. God is love. Does that make sense? I'm calling for a 21st century revolution in Christianity, and I'm not alone. I'm calling for an integration of science. I'm calling for a recognition of spirituality and mysticism. I'm calling for a new awakening. And I'm not doing it by myself. I'm just one person among many. I hope you join me. You already have. Those of you who've had a mystical experience, you already know, and I'm pretty sure it was almost everybody here. Pretty sure that was true. I encourage everyone to talk about it with somebody else. Don't keep it to yourself, because you're going to, even though you think it's a kooky thing, it's only a kooky thing because you think you're alone. I took a huge risk when I came out as a near-death experiencer. I risked my career, my finances, my relationships, my family. I risked because I know I'm not a kook. I know I'm not. I know that God is real. And you do too, because you've experienced it. So talk about it. Don't be afraid anymore. You're not alone. You never were. We only don't know because no one talks about it. You know how domestic violence came into the public fore? Homosexuality got legalized. People talked about it. That's how it happened. They didn't hide it anymore. They didn't hide it anymore. Don't hide this anymore. You don't need to. Do it in a safe place, though. So